Hey, I'm Kurt Baumgartner. I'm a principal security researcher with the Global Research and Analysis team. I've been a part of the team since 2010, and in February, a couple of weeks ago, we released a report on Sofacy's activity that we saw throughout most of 2017. We started off with their targeting and their spear phishing, their dealer's choice operation, and then we moved into their Q2 through Q4 activity throughout Central Asia. Tomorrow I will be talking about their 2018 activity, and really I'm focusing on how they've been moving across Central Asia and targeting organizations throughout the Far East, which is new. We've never seen any public discussion around their targeting in China, Japan, elsewhere in the world, in that part of the world. And so this is new. And it's interesting because, not just because their focus is shifting towards the Far East and broadening out that way, but because the target that we're talking about is an aerospace and defense conglomerate in China. And which fits their previous targeting profiles and sort of the organizations that our traditional Sofacy targets. But when it becomes more interesting is knowing that that particular system was infected and targeted by the actors behind the Lamberts. So Gray Lambert was deployed to that system. Things become much more interesting when you start talking about that system in particular, because we've never seen Sofacy targeting the same system as the Lamberts. So that becomes really interesting. We also, in our blog post, we talked about the module SPLM. This is also known as XAGENT or CHOPSTICK. And throughout 2017, we saw multiple organizations targeted with SPLM modules that were compiled specifically for that target. So they were generally around 300 kilobytes in size, which is kind of a bigger backdoor. It's their secondary stage payload for selected victims. And we saw it really being pushed throughout 2017. The unusual thing about what happened with SPLM is that in 2018, on this server in particular now, we're seeing them break out their modules. So whether it's file stealers or remote shells or keyloggers, we're seeing individual modules being deployed to a system, and they're not being deployed alongside the full backdoor, this larger backdoor. So they're moving away from that entirely. We aren't seeing any more 330K DLLs from this group that are SPLM. Instead, we see a shift in their malware set, in addition to their targeting moving east. So we're seeing them break apart the XAGENT codebase that they've used for almost a decade, and now they're beginning to shift towards chunks and pieces of the modules. And then we're seeing a lot of .NET and PowerShell activity from these guys. So, or at least I should say .NET and PowerShell malware. So they're deploying an entirely different set of backdoors and stealers. So there could be a number of reasons for that kind of change in strategy. The first thing I would do is go back to that particular server in China and say, what's unusual here? We don't really know the source of how the module is being delivered. So in this case, we might speculate on how it's getting there. One, the Lamberts may be planting a false flag just to sow some confusion about what's going on that machine. Two, Lamberts may be appropriating Sofacy code and actually using it for one of their tools or as a tool. Three, Sofacy may have replayed a session so that they're reusing Gray-Lambert to actually get on a system and eventually deliver SPLM, or what's most likely going on, they're exploiting a vulnerable web app and delivering these individual modules themselves. Which is probably what's going on. So in all likelihood, they noticed in 2017 that targets they were attempting to deploy this full backdoor to was simply not effective anymore. Everybody, or I shouldn't say everybody, but the XAGENT code base is pretty well known. They had made, when you look at, say, the 2016 code, where they used SPLM to, as a part of the DNC hack, they basically took that same code base, made a few changes to the encryption ciphers to hide away settings like domains, IP addresses, debug messages, file paths, those sorts of things. And that code modification that they performed didn't really hide the thing from anti-malware tools. So it probably just isn't effective at getting what they want anymore. And they're finding it's expensive, it's probably really expensive to maintain that C++ code. So they're moving on to other innovative and more cost-effective solutions is what it seems like. We'd expect to see that with more of their previous code base, that they're going to start throwing out the C++, maybe use it here and there selectively, but maybe get rid of it altogether and replace it with .NET or PowerShell or whatever else that vendors may not be expecting or defenders may not be expecting. Yeah, well, this sort of reset and this pivot to Asia is something we expect to see more of. They'll continue hitting these targets throughout Central Asia, further east from there, and I would say in the EU, in further west in the US, where they've been deploying all sorts of traditional tools, we might start seeing other types of malware that aren't even attributed to Sofacy yet. So I think they're going to start playing the game a lot differently than they have, where it's been measured and patient, and they redeploy the same malware again and again, expecting it to work at some point. And a lot of the time it has, but that's changed. And the group there's been some major changes. So we saw this in 2009. We saw them change things up then. We saw them change things up in, I'd say, 2011, and we're seeing them change things up again. So it's hard to say what exactly to expect. I can't see the future necessarily, but they're becoming more innovative.